I never thought hypothermia would be the thing that changed my life, but I guess that's how it works sometimes. The moments that matter most catch you completely off guard. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. My best friend Marcus had been planning this hiking expedition for months, gathering gear, mapping trails, convincing our mutual friends to take a long weekend and disconnect from the city. I'd agreed mostly because I couldn't think of a good reason to say no, not because I was particularly outdoorsy. I worked in graphic design, spent most of my days staring at screens in my apartment, and the closest I usually got to nature was the potted succulent dying slowly on my windowsill. But there was another reason I'd said yes. One I wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. Kyle would be going. Kyle with his perpetually wind-tousled dark hair and those impossibly green eyes that seemed to notice everything. Cale, who laughed at my stupid jokes and texted me random thoughts at 2 a.m. Cale, who I definitely, absolutely did not have feelings for. Because that would complicate everything. We were friends, good friends. That was enough. It had to be enough. The group was supposed to be 7 people, but one by one they dropped out. Work emergencies, family obligations, a surprise root canal. By the time we reached the trailhead that Friday afternoon, it was just Marcus, Cale, and me. Marcus had shrugged it off with his usual optimism, saying it would be more intimate this way, a proper adventure for the 3 of us. I'd tried to ignore the way my stomach flipped when Kyle smiled at me over the roof of the car as we unpacked our gear. The first day went well. The weather was perfect, crisp October air that smelled like pine and earth. We hiked through forests painted in autumn colors, stopped for lunch beside a stream where the water ran so clear you could see every stone on the bottom. Marcus led the way with confident strides, consulting his GPS and pointing out landmarks. Kyle walked beside me, close enough that our shoulders sometimes brushed, and I found myself hyper-aware of every accidental contact. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about the novel he was trying to write, a science fiction story about memory and identity that he'd been working on for 2 years. I told him about a difficult client who wanted their logo redesigned for the 5th time. We debated whether artificial intelligence would eventually replace creative jobs, whether it was worth rewatching shows you loved or better to preserve the memory, what we'd do if we won the lottery. Normal friend conversations. Nothing special. Except it felt special to me. Every word, every shared laugh. I kept catching myself watching the way sunlight filtered through the trees and caught in his hair, the way his hands moved when he talked, animated and expressive. That night, we set up camp in a designated spot, 3 tents in a rough triangle around the fire pit. Marcus cooked dinner on his portable stove, some dehydrated camping meal that tasted better than it had any right to. We sat around the fire as darkness fell, watching sparks rise into the star-filled sky. Cale sat across from me, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, and when our eyes met, he smiled in a way that made my chest tight. I went to bed that night in my small tent, listening to the sounds of the forest, and admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding for months. I had feelings for Cale. Real feelings. The kind that made me check my phone constantly hoping for his messages, that made me volunteer for any group activity if I knew he'd be there, that made me memorize small details about him, like the fact that he always ordered his coffee with oat milk and 2 sugars, so that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. But what was I supposed to do with that information? Kyle had never given me any indication he felt the same way. He'd never even mentioned being interested in men. We'd known each other for almost a year, brought together through Marcus, and in all that time our relationship had been firmly, safely in the friend category. I couldn't risk ruining that by admitting feelings he didn't share. The potential for awkwardness, for losing him entirely, was too high. So I'd keep it to myself, treasure what we had, and eventually these feelings would fade. That's what I told myself as I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to rain hammering against the tent. Not a gentle patter, but a torrential downpour that sounded like the sky had cracked open. I checked my phone. 3 in the morning. I could hear Marcus shouting something, his voice barely audible over the storm. I unzipped my tent and stuck my head out into the deluge. The temperature had dropped dramatically. What had been a mild autumn evening was now legitimately cold, the rain coming down in sheets that soaked through my jacket in seconds. Marcus was already breaking down his tent in the beam of his headlamp, his movements urgent. "Flash flood warning," he shouted over the storm. "We need to move to higher ground, now." We scrambled to pack up in the dark and the rain, shoving gear into bags with numb fingers, abandoning any attempt at organization. My tent was soaked through, everything inside damp or wet. I was shivering violently by the time we started hiking, following Marcus's headlamp up a steep trail that had turned into a stream. It took us an hour to reach a ranger shelter Marcus had marked on his map, a 3-sided wooden structure with a roof and a raised platform floor. We collapsed inside, dripping and exhausted. Marcus immediately started assessing the situation. His tent and sleeping bag were mostly dry, packed away before the worst of the rain hit. Mine and Kyle's gear was thoroughly soaked. "Okay," Marcus said, already problem-solving. "I've got one dry sleeping bag. We need to get warm and dry. There's no way to make a fire in this weather. Our best bet is body heat." He looked between us, and I could see him calculating. "I'm going to hike down to the ranger station. It's only about 2 miles from here, and I can move faster alone. I'll get help, get us proper shelter and dry gear. You two need to share my sleeping bag, get your wet clothes off, and keep each other warm. Hypothermia is a real risk right now." "Wait, you're leaving?" Kyle asked, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. He was shivering as hard as I was. "It's the best option," Marcus said firmly. "I've got my emergency beacon, my phone, and I know exactly where the station is. You two will be safer here than trying to hike in this weather. Get warm, stay put, and I'll be back with help in a few hours." Before either of us could argue, he was repacking his bag, leaving us the dry sleeping bag, his emergency supplies, and a water-resistant tarp. Then he was gone, jogging back out into the storm with the confidence of someone who actually knew what they were doing in the wilderness. Kyle and I stood there in the shelter, soaking wet, shivering, suddenly very alone. The rain continued to pour, creating a curtain of water at the shelter's open side. In the dim light of my phone's flashlight, I could see Kyle's lips had taken on a bluish tint. Mine probably looked the same. "We should do what he said," I managed through chattering teeth. "Get out of these wet clothes." It was clinical, practical, nothing romantic about it. We were both shaking so hard that we could barely work zippers and buttons. We turned away from each other as we stripped down to our underwear, trying to preserve some modesty in an inherently vulnerable situation. I could feel the cold settling deep into my bones, a dangerous numbness spreading through my limbs. Kyle unrolled the sleeping bag on the wooden platform. It was a double-wide, designed for cold weather camping, but it still meant we'd be pressed close together. He climbed in first, and I followed, our cold skin making contact as we tried to zip it up around us. The sleeping bag was warm, but we were so cold it would take time for our body heat to make a difference. We lay there awkwardly at first, trying not to touch more than necessary, but we were both shivering so violently that distance was impossible. Gradually, survival instinct overrode embarrassment. Kyle shifted closer, and I did the same, until we were pressed together, arms wrapped around each other, legs tangled, sharing warmth. "Your lips are blue," Kyle said, his voice quiet. We were face to face, closer than we'd ever been. I could feel his breath against my skin. "So are yours," I replied. He raised one hand, his fingers still cold, and pressed his thumb gently against my lower lip. It was such a simple gesture, but something about it felt intensely intimate, more intimate than our bodies pressed together for warmth. His thumb traced the curve of my lips slowly, and his eyes met mine in the darkness. "We need to get your circulation going," he said, but his voice had changed, become softer, and his thumb didn't move away. My heart was pounding now, and not from the cold. "Cale," I started, not sure what I was going to say. "I've wanted to do this for months," he whispered, and then his lips were on mine. It wasn't a desperate kiss, wasn't frantic or rushed. It was gentle, questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, my cold lips warming against his, my hand coming up to cup his face. Every nerve in my body came alive, the cold forgotten in the surge of feeling that washed over me. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Kyle's eyes searched mine, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "I thought I was the only one," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. "I've been terrified to tell you," he admitted. "Terrified I'd ruin everything. You're one of my best friends, and I couldn't stand the thought of making things weird between us. But being this close to you, I couldn't not tell you anymore." I kissed him again, deeper this time, trying to communicate everything I'd been holding back for months. His arms tightened around me, pulling me closer, and I could feel we were both still shivering, but for different reasons now. "How long?" I asked when we broke apart again. "Since the night Marcus introduced us," he said. "You made some terrible pun about graphic design, something about kerning being a matter of personal space, and Marcus groaned, but I thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And then you smiled at me, and I just knew I was in trouble." I laughed, the sound startled out of me. "I've been gone for you since that same night. You were wearing that green sweater that matched your eyes, and you asked me about my favorite design projects, and you actually listened to the answer. Really listened. I thought there was no way you could be interested in me." "Are you kidding?" Kyle said. "You're brilliant and funny and kind. You remember everyone's coffee orders, and you send me articles you think I'd like, and you have this way of really seeing people. I've been trying to work up the courage to tell you for months." We talked for hours as the storm raged outside, our bodies gradually warming, wrapped around each other in the sleeping bag. We talked about all the moments over the past year that had meant more than we'd admitted, the lingering glances and accidental touches that maybe hadn't been so accidental. We talked about our fears and hopes, about what this meant, where we could go from here. Kyle told me about realizing he was bisexual in college, about the handful of relationships he'd had with men and women, about how he'd learned to be cautious about coming out because not everyone reacted well. I told him about my own journey, coming out to my family at 23, the friends I'd lost and the stronger friendships that remained, how I'd dated here and there, but never felt this intensity of connection with anyone. I kept telling myself it was just a crush, I admitted, that it would fade if I ignored it. But it just kept getting stronger. Every time we hung out, every conversation, every text message, I'd find myself smiling at my phone like an idiot. "I do that too," Kyle said, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "Marcus has definitely noticed. He made some comment last week about how I light up when you message me." "Do you think he knows?" I asked. "Marcus is observant," Kyle said. "I wouldn't be surprised if he suspected for a while. Maybe that's why he was so insistent we come on this trip." "And then conveniently left us alone in a sleeping bag together," I added. We both laughed, and it felt good. Natural, like we'd crossed some invisible barrier and found ourselves on solid ground on the other side. As dawn approached, the rain began to ease. We could see gray light filtering through the trees. We were both exhausted, but neither of us wanted to sleep. Didn't want to waste a moment of this unexpected gift of time and honesty. "What happens when we get back?" I asked, the practical concerns starting to surface. "We figure it out together," Kyle said simply. "If you want to. I know this is sudden and we should probably take things slow, but I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to go back to just being friends and acting like this didn't happen." "I don't want that either," I said. "I want to see where this goes. I want to take you on actual dates and hold your hand in public and not have to hide how I feel." He kissed me again, slow and sweet, and I felt something settle in my chest, a rightness I hadn't known I was missing. Marcus returned around 8 in the morning with 2 park rangers, dry clothes, emergency blankets, and a thermos of hot coffee. He took one look at us, still wrapped together in the sleeping bag, our clothes scattered around the shelter, and a knowing smile crossed his face. "Everyone okay?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "We're good," Cale said, and his hand found mine under the sleeping bag, our fingers intertwining. "Really good." "Glad to hear it," Marcus said, and there was definitely amusement in his voice now. "The storm's passed. We should get you 2 checked out by the medics, get some food in you, and then we can decide if we want to continue the trip or head back." We got dressed in the dry clothes Marcus had brought, drank the coffee that tasted like the best thing I'd ever consumed, and let the rangers check us over. No signs of hypothermia, they declared, though we'd gotten close. We were lucky. Lucky the storm had passed, lucky we'd found shelter, lucky Marcus had known what to do. But standing there in the morning light, Cale's hand brushing against mine, I felt lucky for entirely different reasons. We decided to head back to the city rather than continue the camping trip. The trails were muddy, our gear was soaked, and honestly, we were all exhausted. The hike back to the trailhead was long but beautiful. The forest washed clean by the rain, everything green and vibrant. Cale and I walked close together, not quite holding hands because Marcus was right there, but our arms kept touching, and every time our eyes met, we smiled like we were sharing the world's best secret. In the car on the way home, Marcus driving, Kyle and I in the back seat, our hands finally did intertwine in the space between us. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror and grinned. "So," he said casually, "should I be expecting an invitation to a wedding or what?" "Marcus," Kyle groaned, but he was laughing. "I'm just saying, I've been watching you 2 dance around each other for months. It was painful. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you in a closet together or something, though I guess a tent in a thunderstorm worked just as well." "Wait," I said. "Did you actually plan this?" "Plan a flash flood? I'm good, but I'm not that good," Marcus said. "But I maybe wasn't entirely surprised when everyone else cancelled. And I maybe suggested this particular camping spot knowing there was a shelter nearby. And I maybe have been hoping you 2 would finally figure your shit out." Kyle and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. Of course Marcus had been scheming. That was so perfectly him. "Thank you," I said, meaning it, "for being a meddling friend." "Any time," Marcus said. "Though next time maybe we can skip the hypothermia scare. My heart can't take that kind of stress." Kyle squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, and I felt like I was floating. The exhaustion, the lingering chill in my bones, none of it mattered compared to this feeling of rightness, of possibility, of a future I hadn't let myself imagine suddenly opening up before me. That was 6 months ago. 6 months of learning each other in new ways, of first dates that felt both brand new and comfortably familiar, of figuring out how to be together. We took it slow at first, cautious with this precious thing between us, but it didn't take long to realize what we'd found was solid, real, worth building on. Kyle's toothbrush lives in my bathroom now. His books are mixed with mine on the shelf. He reads me passages from his novel in progress, and I show him design mock-ups and trust his feedback. We cook dinner together, argue about what to watch, fall asleep tangled together every night. It's domestic and ordinary, and absolutely extraordinary all at once. Sometimes I think about that night in the shelter. Shivering in the dark, his thumb pressed against my blue lips, how terrified I'd been that admitting my feelings would ruin everything, how wrong I'd been. The truth hadn't ruined anything. It had opened up a whole world I hadn't known was possible. Last week we went camping again, a do-over trip with Marcus and a few other friends. Better weather this time, no storms, no emergency. But on the last night, after everyone else had gone to their tents, Kyle and I sat by the dying fire, his hand in mine, looking up at the stars. "I'm glad it rained that night," he said quietly. "Me too," I replied, though I could have done without the hypothermia part. He laughed and kissed my temple. "Fair point, but I'm glad something finally pushed us to be honest. I don't think I could have kept pretending much longer." "What would you have done if the storm hadn't happened?" I asked. "I'd written you a letter," he admitted. "Had it in my desk drawer for 2 months. Kept almost giving it to you and chickening out. I figured eventually I'd either work up the courage or spontaneously combust from the stress of keeping it secret." "I want to read that letter," I said. "It's yours," he said. "It was always meant for you." We sat there in comfortable silence, and I thought about all the ways love shows up in our lives. Sometimes it's dramatic, a storm and a shelter and a moment of crisis that forces honesty. But more often it's quiet, accumulating in small moments. It's remembering someone's coffee order and sending them articles and making terrible puns just to see them smile. It's choosing to be vulnerable, to risk rejection for the possibility of connection. It's being seen and seeing someone else fully in return. My lips aren't blue anymore, haven't been since that night. But sometimes when we're close, Kyle will press his thumb against them gently, a callback to that moment when everything changed. And every time he does, I'm reminded of how lucky I am. Lucky that the storm came. Lucky that we were honest. Lucky that friendship can deepen into love when you're brave enough to let it. I never thought hypothermia would be the thing that changed my life. But I'm grateful for the cold that brought us together, for the warmth we found in each other, for every moment since. Some stories start with grand gestures and declarations. Ours started with blue lips and borrowed warmth and the courage to finally tell the truth. And I wouldn't change a single thing.